Here's Spirits Chapter 10, entitled The Head. Pretty soon it got dark and they set off. They made sure there was no one around. They walked softly on the frosty ground. No one spoke as they were all so nervous. They could see their shadows on the wall and they looked back to see the school bathed in darkness. It was a relief to them. Little did they know that a small lamp had been turned on behind a velvet curtain. The man moved the curtain slightly, and with a pair of binoculars he looked into the night, and he didn't like what he saw. They trudged on into the woods, ignoring the owls and the running rabbits, as they had far more worrying things to think about. Stepping over branches, they circled the pond which led into the woods. The moon hung frozen in the sky, and James looked up, marvelling at its beauty. It was almost as if he was back home, except there were no stars to accompany it. Tom trudged forlornly behind him, dreaming of his duvet and a long night's sleep. They could see the cottage in the distance. It looked very eerie in the moonlight. A black cat ran across their path and they jumped in fright. Damn, said Tom, what are we doing here? Stop whining, said James. Be cool, the girls smiled and wondered what they had got themselves into. Suddenly they saw a dark shadow move towards the cottage. What is it? Whispered Lucy, growing frightened. Oh my God, said Anna. I think it's a man. Who could it be? Whispered Lucy. I'm not keen on finding out, said Anna hotly. They crouched behind a tree and James covered his mouth as his breathing grew fog-like in the air. Careful, hissed Tom, who was also growing alarmed. The figure moved like a great bear moving with long strides. It was wearing a long coat and hat, and it took a while for the penny to drop. Oh my God, Lucy exclaimed, it's the headmaster. You're right, said Anna. She could tell by his size and the way he moved that it was him. Looking around nervously, he entered the cottage. I wonder what he's up to, said Tom. I'd love to know, said James. I bet it's not pleasant. They inched closer and heard a rattling of the drawers and the clang of cutlery. 5 minutes passed and they were growing restless and tired. Suddenly the door sprang open and he appeared with a heavy bulging sack hanging over his shoulder and a shotgun under his arm. Oh, Jesus, said Tom. I hope he's hunting rabbits. I doubt it, said James. He flung the bag to the ground and reached into his pocket and produced a torch. He flicked on the switch and immediately a beam of pure white light illuminated a section of the woods. They stayed very still and quiet. The light moved this way and that until it stopped barely 5 feet from them. Slowly it moved forward, inching its way towards them. James looked down as a circle of light edged closer to his feet. No one moved and no one breathed. Then suddenly, ouch, God damn, he cried out, startling a crow, which flew into the sky, scattering leaves onto their heads like confetti. He turned around and limped back to the cottage. I wonder what he's up to, said Lucy. I don't know, said James, but that was a close shave. Then the cottage door opened again as they watched in silence. He came out backwards, dragging a large sack before him. That looks heavy, James muttered quietly. They heard him grunt and sweat as he wrestled with the sack. It's definitely the head, said Lucy. I recognize his voice. Shh, said Tom. We all did. They could see his gun on the ground and they didn't want to give him a reason to pick it up and fire. Then they saw something they didn't expect or want to see. A white plimsoll was sticking out of the bottom of the sack. Oh my God, exclaimed Lucy and Anna together. I wonder who it could be, said James. Some poor unfortunate, said Tom, looking angry. What kind of head is this, said Anna. An evil one, said Lucy accurately. They decided to walk back to the school. They had seen enough. Before they could go much further, they saw him drag the sack over the roses, and then he came to a silent stop. He bent down and proceeded to wind the handle. I think it's a well, said James. They heard him throw something down, and it cascaded down the sides, clanking and clattering as it did so before hitting the bottom with a bright splash. Let's go, said Tom. The last thing they wanted to hear was the sickening thud of a body hitting the water. They scrambled through the foliage, and then when they knew they were far enough away, they stood up and ran. They were breathing hard, and they breathed harder when they heard the thud of the James tripped over a log in his panic and they helped him up. At last they got to the edge of the woods and they could see the tall chimneys of the school in the distance, standing like a beacon of hope. Thank God that's over, said James dramatically. But what do we do now? Said Tom. I don't know, James replied wearily. We'll have to tell someone, said Lucy. Yes, but who? Implored Anna. Tom took control as usual. Come to our quarters and we'll discuss it, he said manfully. Not tonight, they said, as they were all exhausted and pretty shook up. They all fell asleep instantly, but they were all troubled by frightening dreams, which was not surprising after all that had happened to them. The next day they met for coffee, all looking weary-eyed and stressed. Did that really just happen? Asked Lucy. Yes, unfortunately, said Anna. I don't know who we can tell, said James dramatically. You never know, they may all be in on it. Just then the last person they wanted to see came sauntering into the canteen with a cup of steaming coffee and a hard look on his face. Oh my God, said Tom under his breath, it's him, don't turn round. They were lucky that they had changed their dirty pumps for clean shoes. He sat on his own, looking smart and smug in his shiny black suit, and the only disconcerting thing about him was the tired, angry frown on his face. He watched him as he surreptitiously scanned the room. He was obviously looking for suspects. Maybe he heard us when he dropped the gun, said Lucy. That's possible, said Tom. We'll have to be careful, he added. We could tell a teacher, in but what's the procedure in this place? There's no police, no courts, no prisons to hold the guilty. This place is like a prison, said James, and one we can't get out of. Who can we complain to when the villain of the piece is the one who's in charge? I didn't think life would be this stressful being dead, said Tom with a gallows grin. Be quiet, said Anne. The head wandered over to them, and he really did look like a lumbering bear. They tried their best not to look frightened, but it wasn't easy. Helly said, "How are things?" Hi, he said, "how are things?" Great, they piped up, smiling. His big brown eyes scanned theirs, and they looked at their footwear, looking for signs of mud, and then looked at their footwear. He was looking for signs of mud after their nightly escape. He looked disappointed. He asked them how they were settling in and about how they were finding their lessons, but his voice was robotic, with no feeling. Then he played his ace. If you need a place to relax, there's lots of lovely walks around the grounds and a beautiful rundown cottage that's worth a look. Cool, said Tom. We may check it out one day. The lessons can be a bit stressful. That's true, said James. Is it far? He asked casually, knowing full well the answer. Not really. About a mile, the head answered, and looked each one in the eye to see if they blinked. No one did. Then he got up from the table and wandered off. Wow, said Lucy, that was stressful. Sure was, said Anna. Do you think he suspected us? She said hopefully. He's just guessing, said Tom, but he wants us to be guilty. I'm not keen on going near the cottage ever again, he said firmly. He'll be laying in wait for us, and I don't want to see the bottom of that well. The girls smiled nervously in agreement. You're a coward, said Anne, but the truth was they were all frightened. They were saved from more worry by the bell for the next lesson. This time it was PE, and to their horror, it was cross-country running. They all thought the same thing, and they hoped they wouldn't be going anywhere near the cottage. They got changed, and about 30 pupils of different shapes and sizes lined up reluctantly. The instructor was jumping up and down like a kangaroo doing warm-ups. He instructed everyone to run round the pond and not to fall in, then through the woods and past the creepy cottage and back again. That's about 5 miles, he said, as if it was a stroll. It's so easy, he said, you can do it twice, and he wasn't joking. Everyone groaned. His name was Mr. White, and he had white teeth to match. He was ex-army, and there were rumours he had been killed in action in the First Gulf War. He was 6'4" and exceptionally fit. One of the things mentioned to each person who initially enrolled at the school was that they stayed the same age as when they passed over. They never aged, and their bodies never withered. It wasn't a place for children, as they would be too traumatized and too unwieldy. He fired a starting pistol, and everyone began jogging, albeit reluctantly. Come on, you idle lot, get a move on, he shouted like a mad sergeant major. He playfully kicked a few of the boys up the backside to get them moving. They ran in a group in the middle so that they could still chat to each other. They were annoyed to be running around the lake again, but they had to make the best of it. They let the jock sprint in front of them and settled into a steady pace. The ground was quite hard and the leaves were dappled by the sun, even though it was frosty. It was really quite pleasant, and they tried to forget about the cottage, but it was hard to shake it off. The teacher stayed behind, so they were on their own. At least we know the headmaster can't be there again, said Tom. You never know, said James. He may make an appearance. The group soon thinned out, and they were leaving the stragglers behind. They came to the end of the pond and headed into the woods. There was lots of shouting and hollering from ahead as they entered. The trees blotted out the sun, and rabbits ran for cover as the people thundered through. Lucy and Anna were huffing and puffing along, trying to chat and gulping in air at the same time. I'm dreading running past that cottage, said Lucy. Me too, said Anna, but don't worry, I don't think anything can happen. There's too many of us. They entered the woods and were surprised at how dark it had gotten. Oh dear, said Lucy, this is spooky again. The trees bent low as if they wanted to scoop the people up into their arms for later. As they got to the centre, it got darker still, except for a small light shining in the distance. What's that? Said Tom. It looks like a small torchlight, said James. As they got nearer, it became clearer. It's a candle, said Lucy. Yes, but who's holding it? Said Anna. Suddenly, a figure emerged from behind a tree. It was the librarian. She was wearing a long black dress, and her black hair was parted in the middle. Appropriately, she looked just like a witch. Her hand stretched out, pointing towards the cottage. She put her hand in her pocket and pulled out a glass ball. It glowed orange and then red. She flung it towards the cottage, which was immediately bathed in a bright red glow. They hid behind an oak tree, too terrified to move. The clouds became dark and thunder rumbled through the woods like a runaway train. A few seconds later, lightning split the sky in a blinding, terrifying flash of light. The other runners stumbled into the woods as the lightning split a tree in two. The librarian stepped behind a large tree and disappeared instantly. It looks like she's angry again, said Anna, very angry. Maybe she's trying to tell us something, Lucy added helpfully. James and Tom brushed themselves down and then took charge. Let's go, said Tom, or people will get suspicious. They carried on jogging as before, but this time more on their guard. They came up to the cottage and speeded up. They could hear the door blowing and creaking in the wind. As they passed, they could see a rocking chair moving slowly. They looked again and were shocked to see her slumped in the chair for a second time, before fading and unfurling like smoke to the ceiling. By now they were getting used to shocks, and they carried on, but still with a little fear in their hearts. Luckily, no one else saw her. They carried on around the lake, which shimmered like a mirror in the sunlight. Tom half expected her to pop up through the ice and scare the hell out of them. His imagination was running wild, and he wasn't the only one. Lucy and Anna couldn't wait to get back to school as they were worried there were more shocks in store. They ran across the lawn away from the cottage and unfortunately near to the well. James and Tom looked down only to see autumn leaves swirling around the entrance of the well. The girls heard a faint moaning noise, twisting in the wind. It sounded like a human voice, but they were far too frightened to hang around for a closer listen. Finally, the race ended and they reported back to the instructor, who was looking pleased with himself. Luckily, no one else had seen the goings on, and they were determined to keep things to themselves until they knew what to do about things. They met in the canteen for coffee, and after they had all changed and a much needed shower. I need this drink, said Anna. I'm exhausted. Me too, said Lucy. I need a sugar rush. I can't believe the things that keep happening to us, James said, exasperated. It's like a curse, I know, said Tom. It's as if she's trying to tell us something. I'm wondering who has been put down the well, James said. Why does no one know anyone is missing? Maybe they don't care, said Tom. I hope they're not all in on it, but I'm starting to wonder, said James. As they were all having their caffeine hit, the head walked by again. He was looking quite pleased with himself, and it was obvious he didn't suspect them. He sat down for his coffee, and he was soon joined by a very attractive woman. She was wearing a black business suit. She was slim with she was slim and with long blonde hair. She was very glamorous and looked like a news anchor from Fox News.